Warning! The following presentation is for education and entertainment purposes only. Under no circumstances are you to adjust or modify any airgun without first consulting a qualified gunsmith and the dealer who will execute your warranty. Failure to do so may result in voiding your warranty, and safety breaches could result in injury or death. Further to that, I am not employed by any of the brand names or companies mentioned in this video. I am a customer, and this video represents a customer sharing experience with other customers. Ladies, gentlemen, airgun tuners of all different persuasions. Today, I've got the old Aussie lab coat on once again, and I'm going to teach you how to tune Impact Mark II. Well, this is my version at least. There are many different ways to skin this cat. And I will link a whole bunch of other videos into the description below so that you can check out a bunch of other people like Ernest Rowe, Matt Dubber, etc., all the mad scientists from different parts of the world. You should never really just take the advice of one stranger on the internet, no matter how charismatic and roguishly handsome he may be. It's always good to get a wide spread of ideas on how you want to do something, so I'll put them in the description. And also I will be chucking some timestamps in the description because this video is probably going to be kind of long. We're going to be covering safety considerations, accuracy testing, the actual method of tuning, and some theory as well. So they'll be all in the description. Check it out down there, skip to what you want to know. And I'm also going to put this video up on a Google Drive so that you can download it. That link will be in the description as well. So if you decide to go and do this at the range and you don't have Wi-Fi or cell phone reception, you can just download it when you're at home, chuck it on your phone, and I'll be right there with you. So let's have a quick chat about safety. Staying safe is important. If you don't do it, you're going to hurt someone or yourself, and you won't be able to go out and shoot after you're done. So, the primary hazards that we're going to be dealing with today are the projectile itself. We need to have some form of pellet catcher. I'm going to be using a sandbag, thinking about using clay this time actually, just to try and keep the dust down a little bit. Second to that, we're going to have noise, and we also want to control how people move around our area so that nobody goes anywhere near anything dangerous. So to do all that, I am going to be wearing hearing protection and eye protection as well, because my gun isn't silenced. There's no suppressors in Australia for your average Joe shooter like me. You have to run it wide open, so it's quite noisy. And in order to contain the noise and stay safe, I'm going to be doing it inside my container shed, as you can see here. It's a great way to contain the ricochets if there are any. There shouldn't be any, because we're going to try and do everything we can to engineer that risk out by using a good pellet trap. And I'm also going to lock the door so that nobody else comes in. At least if they do try, I'll hear them knocking at the door and I'll be able to stop, make everything safe, and then head off from there. So we've eliminated what we can, mitigated what we can't, and we should be right to go from there. So if you're going to do this at your place or at the range, make sure you follow the range rules and just think creatively about things that could go wrong, and then put a plan in place to either remove the risk or mitigate that risk. Theory, right. So to make educated decisions about how you want to tune your gun, you sort of need to know what's actually going on inside the gun and what each point of adjustment actually does. So I've put together, with my mad Microsoft Paint skills, a series of diagrams that I hope will explain visually what I'm trying to tell you about how the gun works and why we're actually going to do each different part of the tuning. I've already done a tuning video. I will put it up there, or there, I don't know, pretty sure it'll be up there, for the FX Crown. But if you have a Crown, go check that out, because it's got specialty disassembly type stuff that you might be interested in. But I don't think I did the best job of explaining what actually happens on the inside of the gun, and that kind of gave me 10,000 questions via DM that sort of I had to re-clarify what I was trying to say. So I'm going to do it visually this time and talk you through what's going on inside the gun, and yeah, hopefully it'll be a bit more clear that way. So let's go for it. All right, so here we go. We've got on the far left, you can see we have the reservoir, and then we have the regulator just to the right of that. We can see my little T-shaped valve, and then you can see the hammer and the hammer spring, the transfer port, the pellet probe, and the barrel. So this is obviously a very crude diagram, but crude is good, crude is simple, and hopefully simple makes it easier to explain. The gun at the moment is not cocked. So there's no tension on the hammer spring, and the hammer spring's not moving around, touching anything or anything like that. This is just to give you an idea on what's going on. So let's chuck some air in there. There we go, nice and blue. So the air in the reservoir, let's say that it's 220 bar. And then we'll skip over to the regulator, and we'll say the regulator has 150 bar in it. The valve in little track in between the reservoir and the regulator controls how much pressure gets into the regulator, which will prevent the regulator from giving an uneven amount of air each time. So let's go ahead and cock the gun. We'll pull the hammer spring back, and the hammer will go back with it. So in this condition, the hammer and the hammer spring are ready to get let go by the trigger, and you can see the pellet probe is fully home and the pellets in the barrel ready to go. The transfer port is lined up with the hole in the pellet probe, and we're ready to fire. So let's go ahead and pull the trigger. So in this diagram now, we can see what's going on after you've pulled the trigger. We can see that the hammer spring has launched that hammer into the back of the T-valve, and that T-valve is opened and air is flowing around the outside of the valve through the transfer port up into the pellet probe, and then is pushing the pellet out of the end of the barrel. So this is where we get into the meat and potatoes of what's really going on when we're tuning. In this picture we can see that the rifle has been fired as per the previous diagram. However, now the regulator T-valve has shut before the pellet has left the barrel. So what this does is basically it's using the right amount of air. So the hammer hasn't hit the valve in the regulator so hard that it's staying open longer than it takes for the time for the pellet to leave the barrel. So you've got a nice controlled puff of air, and all of that air is trapped behind the pellet, and it is that hose has been turned off, if you will, before the pellet has left the barrel, which means that you're not going to just be blowing a big bunch of air out the end of the barrel, and that's important for your shot count, and it's also important for the stability of the pellet leaving the barrel. Strange things happen when you have excess air coming out the barrel after the pellet's left. It can sort of push your pellet around in ways that make it unstable as it leaves the barrel, and you don't want that. So this picture demonstrates just what we've talked about. It's the excess air. So you can see that the T-valve is still open after the pellet has left the barrel, and it's throwing our pellet around like a madman. And you can also see that because the T-valve has been open for so long, we've got excess air coming out of our reservoir through our regulator and sort of free washing around, just doing all sorts of random stuff. And this causes a bunch of strange things. I'm not 100% sure how, but if you have too much hammer spring, you end up with large inconsistencies between each time you fire your air gun, and sometimes all the cards will align, and one round you'll fire around and you'll get, say, 950 feet per second out of it, and then the very next round you shoot you'll only get like 700 feet per second, and you'll just have this gigantic extreme spread, and this is one of the causes of that. And it sort of boggles the mind, because you would think that having the same amount of hammer spring tension banging away, that the same thing would happen, but it every time, but it doesn't, because the amount of air moving out of the reservoir is different each time, because it lowers as time goes by. You might get a certain amount of bounce off the valve, and a great number of different things. So overpowering the hammer spring causes a bunch of different problems, and too much, say, just maxing out the hammer spring most definitely does not mean that you've got the most amount of power that you can get out of your rifle. The correct hammer spring weight, not the maximum hammer spring weight, is what you need. So we will define the correct hammer spring weight as just enough hammer spring to open the T-valve, let enough puff of air to get the actual target speed that we want to get, and we want the pressure within the regulator to shut the T-valve before the pellet has left the barrel. So we've got a nice clean, no wastage kind of a strike happening to our regulator valve. So with that sort of internal description of things that's going on, just remember that my only qualifications on this topic are I have a camera and the internet. So if you are a full-on airgun guru and you do want to correct me in any way, swim on down into the comments and share your knowledge. I'm sure we'll all be very happy to hear it. But yeah, that's pretty much the theory that sort of enabled me to tune up my FX Crown before, and it's going to be the same thing, the same basic principles that I'm going to be using to tune up my Impact. So from there, let's take a look at the bits and pieces that we can adjust on the Impact to achieve this state of smacking that valve just hard enough so that it opens and shuts before the pellet leaves the barrel and leaves us with a nice consistent puff of air. There she is, good looking bird. So at the front we've got our reservoir, and then we go into the guts and we've got our regulator and our hammer spring, and then the air travels through the plenum into the back, up through the pellet probe, and then shoots the pellet out the end of the barrel. So let's talk about our points of adjustment here. Let's begin with the hammer spring. Where's my little... there we are. So just in here, there is a Allen head adjustable screw, and that's how we are going to adjust our hammer spring. And in front of that, we have a valve stop adjustment. That's adjustable just with your fingers, and you can sort of spin it around a little bit at a time and shoot and test and see how you go. And then we'll flip her over and have a gaze in there. So that brass Allen key adjustable screw right in the back there, that is the regulator adjustment. So this is the AMP regulator. You can adjust it up and down without decompressing the air gun. But most other air guns, you're going to have to take all of the air out of your gun before you adjust the regulator. Now we know what we want to achieve. We know where the adjustment pieces are on the gun. So how do we go about adjusting them? Basically, the way I do it is I start with the regulator pressure. The regulator pressure will give you kind of like a ballpark of possible muzzle velocities that you will get from that pressure within the regulator. Generally, the higher you go, the higher the speed of the muzzle velocity will be. So I like to also try and crowdsource as much of this information as I can. So if you have, say, a different caliber to what I've got, because generally I pretty much exclusively shoot the 25 caliber just because it's a very versatile all-round caliber. It packs a serious wallop, and you still get a whole bunch of shots out of one of those carbon fiber tanks. So that's why I like the 25. But I digress. If you shoot the 177, the 22, the 30, or the 357, feel free to chuck your measurements and your regulator pressure and everything down in the comments, because it's always good to share other people's experience. But I've found that at the very least with the 25 caliber, generally FX will send it to you with about 125 to 130 bar settings on the regulator, and that will get you with the lighter 25 caliber pellets somewhere in the neighborhood of 910 feet per second or thereabouts. So if you want more than that, you're going to have to dial your regulator up a little bit, say 5 bar, and you probably get somewhere between 900 and sort of 20 to 940-ish. And if you want to upgrade to, say, a tune that will shoot a heavier pellet or a heavier slug, you're going to need more as well. So you might say you want to tune the King Heavy Mark IIs like I do, you're probably going to have to crank that reg pressure up significantly more, and then tune your hammer spring through its range of motion to find where that perfectly balanced spot is, to get a good, efficient, strong tune. So I'm thinking that with mine, I'm probably going to start around the 135 mark, and hopefully I'll be able to get a fair amount of speed out of that at 135. It'll be another sort of 10 bar on what it's set to now. But the reason, like if I had a shorter barrel, I would need more. I would need more of a shorter, sharper, more powerful punch. But because the 700mm barrel is so long, it gives you a lot of time to have that valve open and still remain consistent. So I'm hoping to get more out of less pressure, more speed out of less pressure with this longer barrel. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. So yeah, if you have any experience, or if you want to share your settings, please feel free to comment below. So once you've figured out where you want to start with your regulator pressure, being that will give you your ballpark of possible results, then we're going to start shooting over the Crony and adjusting the hammer spring from its maxed out position back to its minimum position, I suppose, if you will, over and shooting a shot each time as you adjust the hammer spring to see what happens. Now, cast your mind back to when I tuned my crown. I'll throw the graph up and we'll talk about the graph. So on the far side of the graph, we've got where the hammer spring starts at its maximum preload tension, and then as the shots are being fired and the hammer spring is being adjusted, we sort of look from right to left. We see what happens as the hammer spring moves through its range of motion. So it's going to be very jumpy and inconsistent around the top end, and then as it progresses, you'll see it levels out and it sort of starts to become consistent, and then further deeper and deeper until we go into that shot string. As the hammer spring gets lessened and lessened and lessened, less and less air comes out of that regulator because it's open for less and less amount of time, because there's less and less punch being thrown forwards by that hammer spring. So what we want to do is select the, well, for my purposes at least, we want to select the most powerful, consistent part of that graph and return to that part of the graph. So you run through it, see what happens, and then you pick the part you want to go back to, and then just return your weapon to the settings that you recorded for that particular point on the graph. Now, once we've followed our hammer spring through and found the perfect spot to leave the hammer spring, we're going to do some fine tuning adjustments with the valve adjuster on the front, just above the carbon bottle. And what that does is sort of allows, when you wind it in, it allows less air through, and then when you wind it out, it allows more air through. So I'm going to run that through its range of motion as well, graph that up, and then do the same thing again, return to where it was best. But with those fine-tune adjustments, instead of shooting a single shot, I'm going to be shooting probably 5 rounds each time to see if I can see how big the variation is, because with this fine tuning, The previous graph would have is like you're turning the hammer spring little bit by little bit by little bit, and it's a fine enough adjustment that you can see where you want to end up again by looking at that flat part of the line. But with this super fine tuning adjustment, basically you need a group of rounds over the Crony to see how much the variation is, and then we're going to be charting the variation, not the actual speed of the round, so to speak, if you know what I mean. So we're going to be looking at things like condensing that extreme spread right the way down to try and get it as low as we can, and to have the most consistent possible ridiculously tight groups. So that's what we're chasing with that super fine tune adjustment. So that pretty much does us for theory. Alrighty then, it is now the next week, because I got carried away during my last video and used all my ammo. So that's why there was a delay between the unboxing video and this one. But, ooh, what have we got here? A lovely package from Herman's Guns. So I've got my brick of ammo. They were nice enough to send me an extra 10 to help out with the tuning. So we've got our King Heavy Mark IIs, and you may remember I said that I wanted to try out a bipod, and they decided to struggle town with one hand. There you go. They sent me a Vipertech CT01 bipod to try out. So this is a very, very nice, snazzy little bit of kit. We've got some spiked feet, and the old one-handed unbox, a lovely carry case, and look at that. Beautiful, beautiful quick release Picatinny rail, carbon fibre legs, adjustable, many positions. We got the tilt and pan, so very nice. Big thank you to Herman's Guns. We'll do a full video on that hopefully next week. So if you see something you like here, if you need ammo, or if you need yourself one of these real nice bipods, skip on over to hermansguns.com.au and check out their range. They carry all of the pretty much everything you're going to want for your air gun. Anything that's worth having, they've got it. Right, so let's dig into the actual tuning of the gun, the adjusting and the finagling and the bedoobering. So for my ease of use today, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I'm just going to take the scope off. There's underneath the rail that comes with the impact, there's little skeletonized holes. So yeah, it's kind of makes it easy to aim if you're aiming over a Crony into a pellet trap of some sort. So it's just a little easier to handle. I'll leave the bipod on, so I've got some nice steady footprint to shoot from, and then we'll just run no scope for now. The scope is going to have to be re-zeroed anyway because of the different tune. So we're probably going to reclaim a bit of elevation by putting down a little bit more feet per second in the muzzle velocity. So yeah, we're going to have to re-zero it anyway. So just for ease of use today, going to take it off. All right, so the first step within my method is very important. What you want to do is grab yourself a note paper and a pen and record what your factory settings are. This will let you know whether or not you actually need to tune. You don't necessarily have to tune. Usually FX guns come tuned very, very, very well for the particular type of ammo that they recommend. And you might not have to change the tune at all. So what you do is you record your factory settings. My recorded settings are, I say factory settings, and then I write the particular type of ammo that I'm recording for. Then I record the regulator pressure, the hammer spring gap, the valve gap, and then what the average muzzle velocity was and how big the extreme spread of that group was. And that gives you pretty much all the super important information that you're going to need to know. So if you do decide to go ahead and tune, if you're not happy with what FX has given you for your particular type of ammo, You can go ahead and tune up and do what you need to do, but at least, the very least, you've got your settings, your factory settings recorded, so you can quickly and easily return back to the factory settings if you need to. So very important to establish a baseline, and that's what we're going to do first. Our average muzzle velocity for that 10-shot group over the Crony turned out to be 842 feet per second. The extreme spread was 63 feet per second with a standard deviation of 20.14 feet per second. So not ideal for what I'm trying to do. It's a little bit slow, and the actual sound of that's coming out of the gun is kind of a flat, slappy kind of a sound, and that sort of tells me that we're, for this particular reg pressure, we are using too much hammer spring. So there's actually a piece of duct tape on the back of my hard case that came with the gun that says, it seems to say that it was originally a 30 caliber gun, and I think it was just swapped over to 25 and then sort of quickly fiddled with a little bit, which would explain the state of the tune. It's probably, if I was to whack a 30 cal barrel on there, it would probably be bang on where it needs to be, because it's that extra weight of the 30 cal pellet would absorb that extra hammer spring preload. The heavier the pellet, the more you need generally, so that would explain why it's where it is. But it is still a reasonably good tune. It's not at a level that I would be happy with, but as a factory gun, like, that's an extreme spread of 63 isn't actually that bad. It's probably not really where you would want to be for a gun that's this expensive, but for lower cost guns, that would be completely acceptable, and you could still get fairly good accuracy with that. But we're going to start changing some stuff now. So we know where we're at, and got a good idea of where we want to go. So let's go do that. So we are now going to decide what muzzle velocity we actually want to get. So I want to get somewhere between 900 and 950. I'm happy to sort of settle a little bit closer to the 900 mark, because I want to get more shots, and I don't want it to be quite as loud as it would be at 950. Remembering that mine is not suppressed or shrouded in any way, it's just straight open, straight down the pipe. So yeah, I kind of have to consider that. I probably wouldn't really use it as much on that high setting if it was up around the 950 and it was too loud. So I'm going to aim for, I think somewhere around 900 to 910 would be about as loud as I want to go. So I know from talking to other people that have tuned theirs, you can let your brain do the walking on this one, and talk to other people that have tuned their rifles to give you a good ballpark of where to start with your regulator pressure. So I've spoken to a few blokes, and they reckon that they're getting over 900 feet per second out of 140 bar. So I'm going to crank my regulator up to somewhere between 135 and 140. Wherever it lands, I'm fine with that, and then we'll go ahead and tune the hammer spring. So let's adjust the regulator now. Alrighty, so here we are. I've adjusted it, didn't really take much. A little bit of a tweak in the anti-clockwise direction. Always double check your user manual to when you change it, so you don't wind it in the wrong direction and damage the regulator, because if you do that, you'll void your warranty, and yeah, you'll be in for a new regulator if you do that. If you strip the threads on it, that'll be no good. So here we are at about halfway between the 130 mark and the 140 mark, so we'll call that 135. Right, now we have our regulator pressure set. It is time to max out the hammer spring. We'll max it out, and then we'll run it through its full range of motion over the Crony. So to max out the hammer spring, you have to make sure that your action is decocked. So to do that, you open the action, take the magazine out, make sure it's clear, make sure there's no pellet in the barrel. If you do have a pellet in the barrel, fire it into your pellet trap, or remove it however it is that you remove your pellet from the barrel that you don't want in there anymore. Different guns have, maybe there's different guns out there that you can pull a pellet out or push it through, or whatever you want to do if you don't want to fire it. I don't know, I'd just fire it in there. But and then once you've made safe, so no magazine, no pellet in the chamber, what you're going to do is hold on to the cocking handle and slowly ride it forwards while pulling the trigger, and that will relax all the tension on the hammer spring when the action is then closed. Then from there, we're going to wind our hammer spring adjuster wheel all the way up to max, and then we are going to adjust the hammer spring to the point where it's only just able to move the hammer wheel from its sort of 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock position. That way you'll know that you've got the maximum amount of hammer spring tension while still being able to use your hammer spring wheel. Just further to that, if you try and adjust your hammer spring wheel while your rifle is cocked, you will almost certainly strip the threads off the little adjusting screw. So even when you're adjusting the hammer spring tension with the wheel, not by using the Allen key, it will still do the same thing. It'll be very difficult for it to move it, and it'll damage it if you do that. So always, whenever you're changing power levels on the fly or whatever, when you're out in the bush, just make sure that you decock your air gun before you change the hammer spring setting. Using a 1.5mm Allen key for this job. I'm not 100% sure if that is the exactly correct size, but it fits on mine, and it measures at 1.44 on the calipers or something like that. So I'm assuming if you bought well-made tools that weren't made in China, they'll be the right size, but for me, this is a 1.5mm in inverted commas. So when you do this, just be real slow and gradual as you build up pressure on that hammer spring, because it may have some sort of thread locker in there. So don't just go ham and start ripping on it. Gradually and slowly build up the pressure and make sure that your Allen key is completely fully seated home before you really start turning. And when you do start turning slowly and build up the pressure gradually until you feel it sort of pop out of its previous seat. Alright, so I have been turning the hammer spring screw from the top down, and I've done it a few times, and we've come to a point where I can no longer move the hammer spring wheel with my fingers. It's locked in there because there's too much tension on the hammer spring. So from here, what we're going to do, pop our little screw back in there and just back it out a little bit. Try it. Back it out a little bit more. Try it. We've got a little bit of play now. A little bit more. There we go. And now we can move it from max to 5, back to max, and then back down to A again. So we know that our hammer spring is at its maximum usable extension. So we're done screwing around with our hammer spring, and now we know that it's completely maxed out in its most maxed out usable position, and from here we're going to start firing a shot over the crony, recording it, and then adjusting the hammer spring, firing another shot over the crony and recording it again to build up a data set that we can turn into a graph. So I'm going to go get my laptop and we'll kick on. Laptop all hooked up. I'm using an Excel spreadsheet, and in the first column I've got shot number, so that will change obviously. The first time you shoot, that's shot number 1, second time is shot number 2, and then on the second column I've got muzzle velocity, and then in the third column just across to the right from that I've got the gap, and that would be the hammer spring gap. So that's how we're going to chart this. If you don't want to use a laptop, or you don't have one, or you don't have a computer that you can use with Microsoft Excel, it is available on a smartphone, but you can also just write it down and take note of how the rifle is performing as we go through our shot string. So you don't have to do it this way. This way is just a really good way for me to visually see what's going on and diagnose where I actually want to be and where I want to return to once I've seen all of the different positions of the hammer spring as we go along. And yeah, so that'll be sort of how we make our decision on where we want to go back to, and then we'll shoot another group and confirm and make sure that it is what we want it to be. Alright, so that's 30 shots over the Croney with a small adjustment to the hammer spring between each shot. The adjustment, if you think of a clock face, it's generally from like 9 o'clock up to 10 or 11 o'clock. It's only a very small fraction of a turn, and that has given us this graph here. I've used my numbers on the side there, 1 through 30. I was measuring the gap, but it occurred to me quite quickly that my calipers are garbage. So I stopped doing that, and I'm just going to use my previous method of however many turns it was. So looking at the graph, we can see on the right hand side, it's pretty jumpy. It's not doesn't really fill me with confidence around that area. We're jumping anywhere from sort of low sort of nine teens down all the way down to below 800. So we're going to stay away from that area of the graph, but we can see we've got two nice big flat plateaus right in the middle there. We've got some weirdness going around 15 to 16 turns, so we'll avoid that area. But we can see there's a nice big flat spot there between 12, 13, 14, 15. And then across to the right, we've got another big long flat plateau right around the same muzzle velocity, right on that 900 feet per second line. And that one goes all the way from 17 to sort of 24-ish. So after that, we can see it starts to get a little bit jumpy again, and then it's bleeding off down into the lower power ranges right around 29 to 30. It was gradually falling off. So haven't fallen off the reg yet or anything like that. Got plenty of air, so we know that that's all good. So I am going to be ambitious and go for this first flat plateau. So when you're looking at your graph, it doesn't always have to look at like the graph that my Crown put out. You just have to look at it and interpret it. You can see where the consistent areas of hammer spring tension are, and that's what you want. You want consistency. So we've set our regulator pressure to ballpark our muzzle velocity, and we've ended up with somewhere around 900 feet per second. And now we just have to pick the consistent part of the graph to leave our max, most efficient, most consistent setting on. So now that we know what we're doing, we've interpreted our graph, we're going to go ahead and skip on back to, I'm going to go back to 13. So we're at 30. 30 minus whatever it is to get back to 13 is what we're going to do. So we'll go back to 13-ish, and we'll shoot a group, and we'll see how that group performs. If that group is rubbish, we'll go on back to this second plateau. We'll go right in the middle of that second plateau and see what that does. All right, all adjusted back to one of our sweet spots on the graph. So let's fire a group. I'm going to shoot a 10-round group, and we're going to examine the results of that and see whether or not it's worth staying there, whether or not we need to adjust further, and see how we go. Well, that spot wasn't great. It looks good on the graph, but it's no good once you get a group on it. It was around sort of jumping between all the way from just flat on to 900-ish, and then dipped below 800 as well. So we'll move a little bit further back, a little bit less hammer spring tension. We'll wind it out. I reckon we'll go back to probably about 18, our 18th shot where that was. And we'll try that again and see how it goes. Sometimes you have to give the regulator a little bit of time to sort of settle in and let the hammer spring kind of settle in with that thing. So if you think you might be onto something when you're doing this, just shoot another group. It's not going to hurt. Just give it some time to settle in if you think it's going to settle in. But if it doesn't settle in, then move to a different spot on the graph that looks good to you. All right. Second sweet spot test. We're back up around that sort of 18, 19 turns out from max sort of a spot, so let's have a crack and we'll see how we go. Right, so I shot a couple more groups and it seems to have leveled out fairly well, but it's not quite where I want to be with muzzle velocity. So I've gone and bumped my regulator up just a little tiny bit more. Now we're just under 140 and I'm going to shoot a string and see where we end up. Same process again, just a little bit more reg pressure, so we'll run the hammer string through and see how we go. So after changing the regulator and moving things around a little bit, I didn't actually end up graphing it this time. I just went back through the hammer spring settings to find out where it was looking consistent, and I think I found a good spot. We're just a shade under 140 bar and getting just a shade over 910 feet per second. So that's pretty much where I want to be, and I'm going to chuck a 10-shot group down just to confirm. Hopefully there won't be anything too crazy in there. It should all be within sort of my goal for a good extreme spread is probably about 10 feet per second. Anything under than that's good in my opinion. It's the sort of thing where you really need to start sorting out your pellets for pellet weights and stuff like that, because that's where those factors start coming into play when you're trying to be real fine about things. Anything below 5 feet per second for an extreme spread is exceptional. Very, very good. So hopefully we'll be able to throw a good group down and my suspicions will all be confirmed, and then we can go out and do some accuracy testing. Right, so that group came out to be an extreme spread of 11, which is pretty good. That's I generally would be happy with that. I'm going to, from here, I'm going to just tweak in my valve adjuster just a little smidgy and see if that brings that extreme spread down under 10. I'm probably going to give it a quarter of a turn and shoot 5 rounds and see what happens. And if it doesn't change too much, we'll just leave it where it is. It's a pretty good setup at the moment. Extreme spread of 10's good. Standard deviation's like 3 or something like that. So I think it's probably going to be really accurate how it is. Really nice and consistent. We will have to still shoot some groups and check it just to make sure that the harmonics of the actual pellet leaving the barrel leaves the barrel at a good time, and we'll know that by seeing a bad group if that's happening. If we get some nice good groups with it, nice tight groups, and no flyers being wanged off into the distance, we'll know that we're all good. So let's tweak this valve just a little bit. I'm going to wind it clockwise. For my blues supporters out there, clockwise is the same direction that a clock goes in, so that's how you'll know that one. So we're going to screw it in just a little bit to restrict the air. So let's do that. So that was a weird experience. I ended up tweaking that front valve just the tiniest of little bits, and for some reason my average dropped from 900 all the way down to about 750, and it was quite stable at 750. So after a bit of faffing about, I decided to redo the process, and I cranked up my regulator up to 100 and just a tiny little bit under 140 bar, and maxed out the hammer spring and wound it out from the max. And contrary to the normal graphs that I normally get when I do this, I got a climb. So it climbed from 750 all the way up to about 930, and then started going back down again. So I stopped at that peak. This is not something that I've seen. I've tuned a couple of air guns now, and I haven't seen it do that. It's always been jumpy and horrible, and then flattened out and tapered off, as per my crown and the other impact that I tuned. And now this one is it's a different game. She's a bit different. So, but after all that, I decided to stop and take it back to where it was before, and I went back 1 or 2 turns on the hamspring, and ended up with a average of 917 feet per second. So we're right in the gravy zone where we want to be, and then extreme spread of 6 with a standard deviation of 1.78 feet per second. So we're under 10, which is where I wanted to be, and yeah, 6 is pretty good. Extreme spread of 6, can't really argue with that. I reckon if I wanted to get it any lower, I would probably have to sort my pellets and get a consistent pellet weight going. But I'm not going to do that because I'm lazy. So the only thing left to do now is accuracy testing. So I'll put my settings up on the screen, and then what I got from them, and it would appear on this gun that it likes to run with that valve wide open. As soon as you start doodling around with the valve just above the carbon fiber bottle, it does weird things that I don't understand. So we're going to run that one wide open and just balance the hammer spring and the regulator pressure. Lovely day to come down and have a shoot on the range. Nice crystal clear blue skies. There's a bit of back burning in the area, so hopefully I don't die of smoke inhalation. But we're up here on the grassy knoll on my short range, and down yonder, target set up at 30 meters. Going to zero this one at 30, and then put all my data into Strelok Pro, and then skip on out to 50, and we'll do groups at 30, groups at 50, and see how it performs. Well, so far so good, even including the first cold bore shot. We've got 5 rounds centre to centre in 10mm group. So considering that a 25 cal is 6mm, it's pretty good. It's one hole. Pretty good. Got to be happy with that. I'm just going to wind it down. I'm going to mill it with my reticle and then just adjust the turrets, and then set my turrets like that for a 0, and we'll crack on from there. Well, I'm not sure if I actually fired 5 rounds on that group, but centre to centre, I fired at least 4, and I actually thought I was missing. Thought something had come loose and I was throwing off the paper somewhere that I couldn't see, but they were just going through the same hole. So exceptional accuracy at 30 meters, very good. That group centre to centre is somewhere between sort of 8 and 9mm, so very good, happy with that. So rather than spending too much more air here at 30 meters, I think we should step it out to 50 meters. There's not a great deal of wind, but it's sort of blowing sort of a light breeze of about 3 k's an hour, sort of just enough to move the trees around. And then my Kestrel's saying that it's gusting up to 10 when the winds pick up, but it seems like we're getting a few nice lulls in the wind, so I'm going to skip on out another 20 meters out to 50 meters and do some groups out there, and then yeah, see how we go. So I've just zeroed out my turrets on the scope, just undid the Allen keys, spun it back around to 0, popped it back down, tightened it all back up again, so we're good to go for normal shooting from here on in, zeroed at 30 meters. Tapped all my stuff into Strelok Pro, and now it's telling me that I have to hold 0.7 mils to get out to my mark at 50 meters. So we're going to probably go for the far right hand side of the target, and yeah, crack on, get us a group out there before the wind picks up. Well, that's ridiculous. So they're pretty much printing the same size group at 50 meters as they are at 25. So I'd say as far as barrel harmonics go, I reckon we're onto a winner. So that's an 11-meter group. I'm pretty sure I fired 5. It was either 5 or 6. I wasn't really counting because I was worried that I was missing again because it was going through the same hole each time. But giddy up. So tuning successful. No harmonic issues, no flyers, no nothing. That's just completely unsorted pellets straight out of the tin. Whack them in the magazine. Bang, 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 bang. And yeah, all good. So accuracy test. Going to call that a success. I shot a couple of groups and the first one was brilliant. A little off where I wanted it to be, but not super important. I corrected that with the turrets on the scope and input that data into my app so that it knows what to do from now on. And a few of the other groups after that first really nice one got blown around by the wind a little bit, but even then they were still no bigger than sort of 15 mil, which is pretty good for me. I didn't bother taking it out to 100 meters because there's too many variables that I don't do well controlling at 100 meters. So if you've watched any of my other long range shooting videos, you'll know that it just wouldn't be a good idea to do accuracy testing that far out. So pick a distance that you're competent with, and for me that's 50 meters. And yeah, so accuracy test, win. Very good. And finally, in our final segment, we should probably talk about troubleshooting, because as you may have noticed within this video even itself, things don't always go to plan when you're tuning an airgun. So if something does go wrong, just think critically about what it might be, and then ask the question to whoever you can ask, whoever will listen. There's lots of friendly people within the airgun community, and there's plenty of people, especially even your dealers, who are pretty good at this. They do it quite a bit, so you should be able to ask them for help, and usually they'll help you. But one common problem that I've had is running out of air, or not noticing that I'm running out of air, because you kind of get into like a little zone where you're banging away, and then you look over and all of a sudden you realize that you're dropping off the reg, and the pressure in your bottle's too low for the pressure in the regulator. Something strange as well with FX air guns, where the gauges, even these new ones on the Mark II, my bottle gauge is probably out by about 15 bar. So I am used to looking at my bottle gauge and then using that to judge whether or not I need to refill my air, which is perfectly normal. But on my particular impact, the bottle gauge is it reads about 15 bar higher than what's actually in it, and you'll notice your muzzle velocity falling as you're shooting over the crony, but it seems like it shouldn't because everything's where it should be. But then you like dip under and check your regulator gauge, and your regulator gauge is lower than what your pressure is set for. So it's just like painful FX gauges. Very annoying, but it is what it is. I know about it now, so it's not that big of a deal for me. I don't really care if it reads wrong, as long as it reads wrong the same every time. So it's sort of just an annoying thing, but yeah. So that's probably a good spot to start if you're experiencing some sort of weirdness, is check how much air you've got, and then if you're shooting a shot string and you're winding your hammer spring out as you go, and you get strange looking graphs, just ask the question. There'll be people in the comments, there'll be people on the group chat, there'll be people in all of the links that I put that will be able to help you, and they may have answers that I might not be able to give you. So yeah, so ask the question and check your air. 2 troubleshooting steps that you should do before you do anything else. So this brings us to a close of our feature length. See, that's what you do if you're a YouTuber. If you make something that's way too long like this, you just call it feature length and hope for the best. But thanks for watching. Check out all of the links in the comments. Fill up your mind balls with lovely knowledge. And yeah, feel free to share this video around and smash that like button gently. gently smash that like button. And subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.